So this morning I'm going to do something that I was taught never to do in seminary, which is to attempt to preach on all three of the lessons. So I'm going to try to draw on the first and second lesson in the gospel today. So I'm just going to prepare you. It seems like it's all over the place. I swear it's going to come back to one point. So today we read a lesson from Joshua. And Joshua, this is a special moment. We often read and glorify this journey by Moses out of the wilderness. But this is actually the culmination of those efforts. We find Joshua giving something of a victory sermon or a victory speech of sorts, and speaking to all the tribes of Israel that have now gathered together, crossed over the Jordan, and are what is really the promised land. And we find in this victory speech him really discerning his relationship with God, him really speaking to his commitment. And one of the lines right at the start, Joshua says, "Long ago your ancestors, Terah and his sons, Abraham and Noah, they lived beyond the Euphrates and they served other gods." And he gives this speech and he's really specific about his commitment and asking his people to have a commitment to one God and to make a choice. So that's what we see here. And I think when we look at this passage, we understand that the people did have choices. There were other faiths. I think today we do have a lot of options in terms of the different faiths we can choose from. But where it's really applicable is this idea of other gods. What are these other gods? What are these other gods that kept these people from being in community? I think the quick go-to in a lot of sermons that you might have heard is money or power. But I'm going to go a little bit deeper and we're going to get past that. So I'm going to take my next step into the second lesson, which is the letter of Paul to the Ephesians, where he asks us to put on the armor of God. And in this lesson, he uses this strong language at the beginning, that you should put on the armor of God so that you might stand against the wiles of the devil. And he says, "For our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of the present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." I think our minds can get very carried away with exactly what that is. And I think it's important that he points out this symbolic language. He says, one specific line, "The sword of the Spirit," which is one of our pieces of armor, is the Word of God. So we quickly learn that what's being addressed here is symbolic language. So if this sword he's talking about is the Word of God, then what is all this other stuff that he's talking about? What is the devil in our life? What is that really? Is that a man with a pitchfork that's running around, or is that something a little bit more specific? What is these spiritual forces in our life that are impacting our life? I guess to say it a little more clearly, what keeps us separate? Like the community, the tribes of Israel that separated and come back together, Joshua is talking about that which unites them. What is it? What are those gods that kept them apart? And in this second lesson, what are those devils and spiritual forces that are keeping the community separate and apart and people apart? For us in our lives, if we get very specific, what is it that is keeping us out of relationship and intimate with those people that are closest to us? I mean, it's easy we have wonderful relationships. I'm sure many of you have great relationships with people in your life, friends and family you get along with. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the relationships that you might have sort of pushed away and you don't want to talk about and you don't want to address. The challenging relationships. Those are the ones that I'm talking about. So, although this is really the tip of the iceberg in terms of what these gods, what these devils might be, I want to talk about what I think they are. And I think that the place that we need to start is by listening to ourselves and by listening to other people. And we do it in a very particular way, and let me explain that. So, I'm going to share a personal story about when I was a little kid, maybe help illustrate this. When I was about 5 years old, I remember coming home from Montessori school and rummaging through all my stuff. I was excited. I wanted to dress up. And I remember I wanted to be a cowboy. And so I got home, and I remember putting on my gun belt and my hat and running around the house as a cowboy, all excited. That's all I remember. And a couple years ago, I was talking with my mother, and I was sharing the story about just having this really random memory about, being so excited about dressing up like a cowboy. And she said, it's funny that you say that, because that day was Halloween. And early that morning, I had dressed you up like a vampire, a really scary vampire. And when I picked you up from school, the teachers said that you were horrified because when you got there, everyone was scared to death of you, and all the other kids were running away from you. And when I got home, I immediately wanted to change into something new so that I wouldn't horrify people anymore. This is one small story from my life that probably had an extremely deep impact on who I became in my life. There's this little tiny thing that happened on Halloween had this impact into who I would become. And I think that this particular story is kind of mild. I think many of you, including myself, have had experiences that have had even more profound impacts on who we've become. I could guess that people here have gone through divorce, your parents getting divorced. You might have experienced losing someone very close to you. You might have experienced some sort of abuse in your life that was really challenging. And oftentimes we forget about it. And oftentimes we push it aside because it's really difficult to deal with. But a lot of times those experiences are what paint how we treat other people, and we don't even know it. It's like our past just comes up behind us and starts acting through us, and we don't even know that that's going on. That's the listening that I'm talking about, listening to ourselves and seeing that happening. And there's another type. There's listening to other people. I had a friend that shared a story about listening to other people in sort of a unique way, and he gave me permission to share this story. And he was a young boy growing up in South Africa during the apartheid, and his mother was able to send him away to the United States. She was fearful for his life. And many years later, she was able to move to the States, and they lived together. And for many years, they were living together, and he held this sort of anger and this grudge that his mother would send him away and not be with him, that she would do this. And he never spoke about it. It's a conversation that was in the past, a really difficult conversation. Finally, one day, he decided to ask his mother a really powerful question. How was it for you? And he said his mom shared with him how difficult it was. She shared horrendous stories with him